Nearly 100 PAOs and journalists gathered at the JFK Library in Boston in September for the 50th anniversary of the Naval Reserve's oldest public affairs unit. 13 of the 24 officers who have commanded the unit were among the honored guests at the event. Also attending were representatives from CHINFO and the Director of Naval Reserves.
One former CO who couldn't be here tonight sent along this letter that he asked me to read to you from Captain Charlie Cragen. He says, "Old friend and public affairs colleague, I regret that my schedule will not permit me to join you and my former shipmates at your change of command ceremony on Saturday, September 18th. I would, however, like to take this opportunity to offer my most sincere congratulations on the selection of my good friend, Jim Harner, to be commanding officer of the Naval Reserve's first Public Affairs Unit, Navy Information Bureau 101 on the 50th anniversary."
The guest of honor at the gala event was 96-year-old retired Lieutenant Commander Hank Lundquist. Lundquist was one of 3 reservists who founded the unit in 1949.
Well, we're a pretty diverse group. We had an orchestra leader. We had, within a year, a very promising young politician. We had professionals from the Public Information Office in the World War II, and anybody who was really interested and into public information could join, and did. And if you look at the list of the first 10 or 15 commanding officers, you have a pretty good idea of who the plank owners were that first and second years.
And during World War II, when you'd get a call from a radio reporter, what did they typically want to know? What did they ask you?
Really not much. We were not able to tell them anything. And we really didn't know anything because of the tight security, especially here on the eastern coast, on movement of ships, on the movement of troops, and we never heard anything about victory or defeat until about a month after it happened. It was frustrating. So it was mainly catered to what needs they had when we could.
The Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a proclamation by His Excellency Governor Argio Paul Cellucci, 1999. Whereas, since the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, public affairs specialists at the 1st Naval District, and since 1974 at the Navy Office of Information in Boston, have served as a critical link between the region's media and the United States Navy. And whereas since 1949, the Boston office, with the aid of local Navy public affairs reservists, has responded to short-fused media inquiries, arranged for interviews with sailors, and deployed reporters and photographers to ships around the globe. And whereas, with help from reservists, the Navy Office of Information has routinely organized dozens of ship visits each year from Rhode Island to Maine. And whereas the Navy Office of Information's reserve professionals have worked closely throughout the region with community leaders and elected officials to assure that exemplary ties were maintained between the Navy and the taxpayers of this nation. Now, therefore, I, Argio Paul Cellucci, Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, do hereby proclaim September 18th, 1999, to be a day of celebration for the Naval Reserve Navy Information Bureau 101, Boston.
Well, we had a great bunch of people. You talk about the media today, and you start naming the media, if it's television, radio, newspapers, and so on. And we had representatives in every one of those. And if a project was underway in the 1st Naval District and they wanted publicity, they wanted public relations.
First of all, I want to apologize because I'm not in uniform. But all I could find was my old cap from back in the 40s and early 50s, which is covered with a blue cap cover, and I don't think any of you ever saw one of those, or a bridge coat up in the attic, and I didn't think that was appropriate either. I think most of my speech has already been taken care of, so I will tell you how the unit came into being. Long about Labor Day in '49, when I was at WCOP at the time as a writer and producer, I got a call from Commander Sam Reed, who was the district PIO at the time. That's Public Information Officer. And he asked me if I would be available for lunch on a certain date, that he had asked Tom Horgan and Bill Schofield to be present. And I said I thought I could, and I did, and we four met at Patton's Restaurant on School Street, if any of you are old enough to remember that. There was an upstairs and downstairs restaurant. Downstairs was pretty much cafeteria. Upstairs was a little more commodious and civilized. And that's where we met and talked. And Commander Reed wanted to know if we thought that a reserve unit for public information officers would be possible. And before the lunch was over, we allowed that it was, and that we would try to get in touch with the possible charter members, or plank owners, if you will. And we did, and it was successful. And from that came Public Relations Unit 1-1, the predecessor to the current unit. I was going to tell you all about Tom Horgan and Bill Schofield, but I don't need to, because you know who they are. They remained, for their lifetime, very good friends of ours. Very good friends. We all were friends. We had served together in what was then the Public Relations Office of the 1st Naval District during the war. When I reported aboard in August of 1942 at the District Public Relations Office, Tom Horgan was already there. Bill Schofield arrived the same day that I did. We both had similar experiences. Those were the days of the 90-day wonders, when if you were commissioned directly into the Navy, you got 90 days indoctrination at some university somewhere. I had orders to Harvard University. Bill had, I think, to Dartmouth. Both of our orders were canceled, and we went directly into service without a single day of indoctrination. And I didn't know whether to salute with my right hand or my left, so I probably didn't salute at all. However, we both managed. I'd like to pause just here for a second and say that I've been reminded tonight of what Kirk Douglas said at the time he received his Lifetime Achievement Award from the motion picture industry. And he stood up there at the podium, waving this trophy like Zeus about to throw a thunderbolt or something like that. And he looked out and he said, "I see my sons out there. They are proud of the old man." Well, I look out there tonight and I see my two sons. The old man is proud of them. One other thought, please. I'm not a Harvard man, but for some reason, I have always wished I was. And the Harvard alma mater sticks in my throat at all times. There's a message there for you. Dear Harvard, thy sons to thy jubilee throng, and by, I believe it's blessings, but I'm not sure, by blessings surrender thee o'er from the days that are past to the days that are coming before. Don't give up hope. Fight. We need the Navy. We need you. Hang in there and go for it. Thank you.
Well, in 1946, I had finished my active service, as it were, but didn't have enough points to get out. I had been in sub-chases for 3 years, and I was assigned to the 1st Naval District and to the Public Relations Unit until, a couple of months. I'd have enough points and that would be it. One of the months was March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, of course, in Boston. I'm Irish. My father was very active in the Hibernians, and I happened to look over the roster of ships in 46 that were coming in. They were coming in droves, and there was a small aircraft carrier, USS Shamrock Bay, and waiting for the scrap heap, as it were. And I said to myself, the Boston Post, which was the largest morning circulation paper, would be an excellent vehicle for a St. Patrick's Day story. They'd love anything Irish. But here's the Shamrock Bay in Boston. Why don't I get my father to make some kind of a presentation, a scroll or whatever, and see what the publicity would bring? So we did. He gave the captain of the Shamrock Bay a shillelagh and also a scroll, and that was the total summation of what he gave. It made the front page, 4 columns wide, of the Boston Post. It was covered by the Yankee Network, broadcast live on radio, and was really turned out to be a terrific public relations story that I felt and was very proud I had created. The kicker, of course, was the Shamrock Bay was named for Shamrock Bay in Alaska.
But I'm asked many times, what was it like back then? Well, I could tell many stories. Boston was a thriving seaport. Navy-wise, the shipyard was going full strength. We had destroyers and cruisers, and of course, old Ironsides over there. We had carriers tying up in South Boston. The USS Wasp was stationed here. And it was just unbelievable, the change that has occurred. But in those days, we had people. Now, I first became acquainted with the unit on my first public affairs assignment, which was in 1950 during the Korean War. I was assigned to the 1st Naval District as the press and photographic officer. And I soon discovered that everything that happened in those days, the Navy was not as centralized as it is now. I mean, now anything happens, you have to go to DOD or to the Navy out of Washington. They can tell you all about it and answer your questions. In those days, the naval districts handled almost everything. And for example, we had a collision between the carrier Wasp and the Hobson, in which dozens of people were lost. It was handled entirely from Com 1, the 1st Naval District. Well, I found out then that, there were people you could call up, and like Tom Hagen, and who mind anything you wanted, wound up on the AP wire, and then a UPI, and Reuters would copy it, and pretty soon it was all over the world.
I came off active duty in '68 and joined up at the time that Jack Halloran and Captain Jack Halloran and Captains Ron Bryn and a dear friend, Captain Dick Lamry, the late Dick Lamry. They were the prominent figures in our unit.
When you think of NAV info today, Captain, what comes to mind?
Well, I'm very impressed with your professionalism. You guys have got far more technical gear than we ever had. I mean, we were blessed with Mark I Mod 0 typewriters, and we did an awful lot of things with longhand, and we even had those old Graflex cameras. So, but and the media's changed too. I think perhaps the media is more pro-military now because of the professional posture of an all-volunteer Navy, Army, and Air Force.
Just one question, I'll let you go, Captain. What's the strangest or most unusual or maybe funniest thing that happened to you while you were in NAVInfo?
Well, I think it happened as it involves the Captain Jack Gallant, and you'll probably hear this story many, many times. And Jack was a very well-decorated veteran of Vietnam, and he was in country with the intelligence forces and served with the Montagnards. So Jack ended up having about 6 rows of ribbons when everybody else had 1 or 2. And the inspecting admiral said to Jack, who was a lieutenant at that time, "Lieutenant, where did you get all those ribbons?" "At the exchange, sir," was Lieutenant Gallant's candid comment. Well, obviously it broke up the ranks, and that admiral never did notice that Jack was wearing unreg white bucks with his white uniform.
But moving on to the 60s, which is my territory, it was a very busy decade. We did a lot of great things. 1963, the thresher went down, and George Hall, who was the Public Information Officer, or PAO, he may have been by that time, set up a CIB up in Portsmouth, and all the guys from the unit, without pay, came in to fill in the office and handle the calls and do all the good things. We did get a silver anvil at that time, but as Jim points out, it was for some other events. And I recall that we did a 50th anniversary of naval aviation. I think Bill Schofield did a book on 150 years of destroyers. We also did a badly over-promoted Blue Angels appearance at South Weymouth, where we managed to tie up the South Shore for several days. Nobody could move on the highways. And we routinely get the cover page of the Sunday Globe Roto and whatever you wanted, because we had all these great guys who from World War II were still in positions of importance. Then later in the decade, we started the youth program tie-ins with the USS Constitution turnaround that culminated with our Civil Anvil in 1973.
The memories of the 70s, which I was assigned to, probably the biggest and best thing was the anniversary of our country, where we all pull out the stops. And the one thing I say about the unit is I can't remember in the years I was in the unit, and the same thing applies in New York City, which I, again, had the honor of commanding down there on Fifth Avenue. Nobody ever said no, no matter what was wanted. No one ever said no. Many of the wives, including my own, can tell stories about, what do you mean on Christmas you're going to go and fly to East Senegal for, I mean, and some of it was unbelievable. But all in all, when I took my wife to Hawaii in 1988, we decided to take a trip. She had never been there. I had been stationed at Pearl on the way into Korea. We went there, and when I took her and I got my retirement ID and she got hers, and I took her to lunch at the Oak Club, that beautiful Oak Club at Pearl Harbor. And then a month later, when she got the first check, she says, "This is wonderful." So it was worth it all.
This headline will show you one of the more interesting things that I ever had to do in crisis communication over the 37 years that I've been in the public affairs business. This was a circumstance in 1984. A civilian shipyard literally and physically held a Navy destroyer hostage. They chained it to the pier. They wouldn't let the crew come or go. There were legal aspects to it, but there were certainly a lot of public affairs aspects. And in 5 days, we answered 485 media inquiries, my staff and I.
And did you go home during those 5 days, sir?
Not much. And when I did, the phone was always ringing, and there were 4 or 5 messages that my wife had lined up for me to answer when I did get home. No, actually, for the first couple days, it was pretty much 24 hours a day.
Has anything like that, to your knowledge, ever happened prior to that time or since?
We did do some research, and there had never, ever in history been a U.S. Navy ship held hostage, and this was literally held hostage, chained to the pier, gates to the shipyard closed. It was just kind of strange.
Reflections. Okay, very quickly. I've seen the Alamo about 1,900 times. My favorite part is when they know that they bought it. You know, they're going to get killed the next morning, and they're all sitting around talking, and they're talking, and they turn to John Wayne, and they say, "Davy, what are you thinking about?" And John Wayne says, 4 words, "Not thinking, just remembering." So when I remember NAVINFO New England 101, and I remember the 80s, I remember a lot of professionalism, but I also remember the people as individuals. Captain O'Brien, I remember his leadership, his sage advice, no problems, just opportunities, and I also remember how he got his Navy Reserve nickname. Ask him about that sometime. Durfer, I remember his skill in piloting the unit through the system, his jokes, and his outstanding ability to write superb fitness reports for aspiring junior officers. I remember Phil Rubin and his many lessons to us about the importance of covering all the major issues and the little details. I remember John Lepore, patience, coolness under stress, Father John, and he earned the name. I remember Al Rossi, quick wit, and his Taurus XO, he used to ask, "How am I doing?" If Al was here today, I'd say the same thing to him I said back then, "Al, you're doing just fine." To my brother of a different color, Jack Gallant, honesty, candor, and professional role modeling. Jan Clement's quiet ways of doing things. And has anybody seen Ron Mullick? I remember Dennis Williams' over-the-top energy level, and that's a fact, Jack. I remember Haskell's useful grin and his on-air voice and presence. I remember Dan Gallagher's level-headed guidance and direction, and Joan O'Connor's focus and her determination to stick to an assignment and its completion. I remember Ron Bryn's penchant for long work days and the extra air class he brought to the unit. I remember Bob McWade's wit, work ethic, and his absolute mastery of the act of pranks. I remember Tom Nugent's diligent support of those who enlisted members in his charge and his willingness to go an extra mile to junior officers and others under his direction. I remember Pat Rosanna, Bill Barron, Ruth Davis, Donnelly Smith, Estelle Noah, and all their efforts. I remember Dick Gorham's knack of getting things done, no matter what. I remember Jim Harner's outstanding planning skills and his 1,300 Sunday afternoon zone outs. Ask him about that. I remember Willie Alexander's honesty and his unassuming personality. I remember Chris Isleep's warmth and humor, and I remember Charlie Craig. And Charlie who? That's how he was greeted. And I remember Captain Jack Halloran's class and his style.
So let's get started. I'm going to give you 90 seconds of the 90s as fast as I can. What happened in the 1990s in NAVINFO 101? We had the Kennedy come and see us. Everybody remember that? Thank you. Preceded by the commissioning the Arleigh Burke, right? We closed down Weymouth. Right? VP 11. Do we love VP 11? Storm of the decade, right? Kathleen Williams is sitting up in 35 inches of snow in Brunswick, Maine, and we're in Puerto Rico. Do we have it made? Kurt Wesseling, would you like to comment on the Admiral's flying P-3s? My favorite all-time gig, through the graces of Captain Jack, who became the World War II, both civilian and officer at Shinfo, we went to Italy and then Normandy and stormed the beaches for the 50th anniversary of World War II. Captain Jack! This happens to be my all-time favorite hat. There's a captain in this audience, and he and I were named honorary chairman of the women's softball team for the Grande Padano. Michael Hunter, that means big cheese. And we have the pictures. We proceeded on. Thank you very much. Captain, she's doing a good job. The unit has done so many commissionings we've lost track, but our favorite, where's Commander Britton? The Grace Hopper. Soon to be followed by the commissioning and launching actually of the Winston Churchill just recently, and the first ship's visit to the east coast of a Great Lakes ship, the USS Clark. And I would be remiss if I didn't remind you, in 1999, to cap the decade, the University of Maine Black Bears won the national championship hockey tournament. soon to be followed by my University of Connecticut Huskies winning the 1999 NCAA championship. We do have priorities, even in the Navy.
Hank Lundquist, who goes back to the founding of the organization in 1949, his prior service in the Navy as a public relations officer, as they then called during World War II, and just taking the various decades and moving forward 50 years. And there's another 50 years ahead of this organization supporting the Navy. It's a strong tradition, a heritage. I mean, it really underscores the Navy's core values when you look back at the organization and the commitment the folks have had, and also their total dedication. So I mean, it really is a strong organization. It's had strong people, and have contributed totally of themselves. So when you talk about honor, courage, and commitment, you can look at this Naval Reserve organization and the public affairs program, which has its heritage in Boston, and the importance of the underpinning of the organization and its commitment to the Navy and its impact with the press.
Admiral Jakowski, Chief of Naval Information, summed up the importance of the night and the unit's contribution in a letter that was read by Lieutenant Commander Hank Lundquist's daughter-in-law, Laura Lundquist.
Dear shipmates, as you commemorate the 50th anniversary of Navy Information Bureau 101, I would like to congratulate the entire Reserve Public Affairs team, both past and present, for providing the Navy with so many years of superb public affairs support. As a native of New England, I have an appreciation of our Navy's ties with this area, and those ties date back to the earliest days of our nation. The fact that the citizens of New England have such a deep understanding and appreciation of our Navy is due in large part to the superb effort of public affairs professionals. These efforts date back to World War II and the 1st Naval District, and continued with the Chimful Branch Office in Boston and the Navy Information Bureau. As the Navy Information Bureau prepares to transition to its new location at the Naval War College, I am confident that you will provide the same tremendous support in telling the Navy story. The Navy owes a great debt of gratitude and thanks to our public affairs personnel, both active and reserve, for being there when called upon. Eager, willing, and always professional, you and your untiring and unselfish efforts are deeply appreciated. We are indeed one Navy and one team, and I could not be prouder of your efforts. Sincerely, Thomas J. Jakowski, Rear Admiral, United States Navy.
Allegiance to the same.
Also part of the evening were a few important events at the podium. Petty Officers Wesling and Devine re-enlisted. JO1 Jeff Schwartz had his chief anchors pinned on. Lieutenant Commander Emmett Francois received a long-awaited Navy Achievement Award. Captain Jack Gallant received the Meritorious Service Medal, as well as a few other awards, including a piece of coal from the HMS Titanic and a flag that was flown over 408 Atlantic Avenue during the last day of the office's operation. Capping the event was a change of command where Captain Jim Harner relieved Captain Bill Hendricks in a brief ceremony.
The watch goes on, engines ready, full speed ahead. Are you on board? President accounted for? Yes, sir. And let's get booming and steaming. Because hey there, do you remember when we formed back in '49? Say, didn't we form it fine? Lots of hard work, lots of tradition, helped us hold to our lead, served the Navy's needs. Say there, do you recall just how that fire of 50 years ago propels us today toward a future glow? Crazy, but growing hazy, are those one days gone by? Do you remember? Do you remember? If you remember, well, I'd say that you're here longer than, quite a lot longer than, you're here longer than I. Thank you very much.